Hook. The cowboy came to town looking for an answer he feared more than death. But before he heard it, a stranger pulled him out of a dry well and into a mystery neither of them could explain. A rope snapped with a sharp crack. Dust exploded upward as Wyatt Brooks vanished into the darkness of an abandoned well. Blood warmed his sleeve. Above him, a circle of blazing Arizona sky spun out of focus. Then came another sound, the scrape of boots on stone. A woman he'd never seen before tied a rope around her waist and climbed down without a word. Hours later, he woke in his own house to find her sitting beside the stove, quietly changing his bandages. She should have been gone by then. Instead, she looked at him as if she already knew something he didn't. Would you have trusted a stranger enough to let them change your life? Let us know below. Late summer settled over Painted Canyon like a sheet of heat. Red cliffs shimmered in the distance. Dry grass bent beneath a restless wind that carried dust across the wagon road. Wyatt Brooks stepped out of Dr. Eli Grayson's small clinic just after noon. The screen door creaked shut behind him. A woman waiting on the porch glanced up when she heard his voice through the open window. Only one sentence carried outside. I want to know if I'm truly Barren. Then silence. A moment later, Wyatt emerged, hat low over his eyes, jaw tight. Dr. Grayson called after him, but Wyatt was already walking toward his horse. He never waited for the answer. By mid-afternoon, he reached Cedar Bluff Ranch. The cattle were gathered near the northern pasture. The corrals stood quiet beneath the sun. Everything looked the same, yet something followed him home. The question, the one that had followed him for nearly 10 years. Near sunset, he rode to an old well at the far edge of his property. The well had supplied water before the creek began drying up. Now it sat mostly abandoned. Wyatt dismounted and tested the weathered rope hanging over the stone rim. The fibers looked weak. He leaned forward. The rope snapped. For one terrifying second, there was nothing beneath him. Then came the crash. Stone, dust, pain. His shoulder struck first. A sharp edge tore through his sleeve. Blood ran down his arm. Above him, the circle of sky seemed impossibly far away. He tried to stand. The world tilted. Then darkness swept across his vision. Some distance away, a mule plodded along the road. The woman leading it stopped. Savannah Reed frowned. She had heard something. Not a coyote, not a loose board. Something heavier. She followed the sound across the field until she reached the old well. When she looked down, she saw a man lying motionless among broken stones. Without hesitation, she tied her rope around a nearby post and secured it around her waist. The descent scraped her hands raw. At the bottom, she knelt beside him. His pulse was steady. His skin was not. Too warm, far warmer than it should have been. The cut on his arm wasn't fresh. Part of it had already begun to redden days earlier. "You've been working hurt," she murmured. He didn't answer. The rescue took nearly an hour. By the time they reached the ranch house, the western sky had turned orange. Savannah cleaned the wound with boiled water. She found old bandages in a cabinet. She mixed willow bark into a cup and left it cooling on the table. Night settled over Cedar Bluff Ranch. The house remained silent except for the crackling stove. Hours later, Wyatt opened his eyes. The room was dim. A lantern glowed near the kitchen. For a moment, he didn't recognize where he was. Then he saw her, a woman sitting beside the stove with a sewing needle in her hand, quietly repairing a torn strap from her travel bag. She looked up. Their eyes met. "You're awake," she said. Wyatt pushed himself upright and immediately winced. "You should stay down." "Who are you, Savannah Reed?" She set the needle aside. "You fell into your well." Wyatt glanced toward the fresh bandage around his arm. "You did this?" "Yes." "Why?" Savannah seemed surprised by the question. "You were hurt." The answer came so simply that Wyatt had nothing to say. Outside, the wind rattled the porch boards. Inside, the stranger rose from her chair, checked the bandage, and tightened it gently. She didn't ask for money. She didn't ask for a favor. She didn't even ask to stay. She simply returned to her chair beside the stove. For the first time in a very long while, the old ranch house no longer felt completely empty. Neither of them knew it yet. But the question Wyatt had carried for years was only the beginning. The next morning arrived cool and clear. A pale ribbon of sunlight stretched across the kitchen floor. The coffee pot on the stove let out a soft hiss. Wyatt woke before dawn, out of habit. For a moment he forgot about the fall. Then the ache in his shoulder reminded him. He sat carefully on the edge of the bed and noticed something unusual. A clean glass of water, fresh bandages folded beside it, and a small note written in neat handwriting. Change dressing after breakfast. The note wasn't signed. It didn't need to be. When he stepped into the kitchen, Savannah was already awake. She stood near the stove wearing the same travel dress from the day before, sleeves rolled back, carefully stirring a pot of oatmeal. Her mule waited outside near the corral, packed, ready to leave. "You heading out?" Wyatt asked. Savannah looked over her shoulder. That was the plan. He nodded. Neither said anything for several seconds. The quiet wasn't uncomfortable, just unfamiliar. A wagon rattled into the yard before either could speak again. Martha Boone climbed down slowly. The widow carried a basket covered by a checked cloth. "I heard you nearly killed yourself," she called toward Wyatt. "Morning to you too, Martha," she snorted. Then her attention shifted to Savannah. The older woman studied her carefully, not suspiciously, curiously. By the time breakfast ended, Martha had already learned where Savannah came from, how long she'd been traveling, and that she once worked beside a midwife moving between settlements. Martha's expression changed immediately. "We need someone like you." Savannah blinked. "For what?" "For nearly everything." Martha lowered herself into a chair. 3 expecting mothers in town. 1 baby due before frost. Dr. Grayson can't be everywhere. Savannah looked down at her coffee cup. "I don't stay places." "Why not?" The question lingered. Savannah took a moment before answering. "People usually find a reason not to want me around." Martha's eyes softened. "Well, that sounds like their problem." Wyatt hid a faint smile behind his coffee mug. An hour later, Martha left. The ranch grew quiet again. Savannah carried her travel bag onto the porch. Wyatt followed. The morning wind stirred dust across the yard. The mule shifted impatiently. "You don't have to stay," Wyatt said. Savannah nodded. "I know. But if you need a place for a while..." He paused. The offer felt awkward in his mouth. "The spare room is empty." Savannah glanced toward the house, then toward the distant road. Miles of dry land. No destination. No certainty. "When your shoulder heals," she said, "I'll move on." "Fair enough." And just like that, the arrangement began. The days settled into a rhythm. At sunrise, Wyatt rode the fence lines and checked the cattle near the northern pasture. Savannah often spent mornings helping Martha Boone visit homesteads scattered through Painted Canyon. She checked fevers, cleaned wounds, helped frightened young mothers. Sometimes she returned with dust covering her boots and exhaustion behind her eyes. Yet she never complained. One afternoon, she treated a little boy who had sliced his hand on a broken wagon board. Another day, she sat beside an elderly ranch wife struggling through a fever. People started recognizing her face. Not everyone welcomed it, but many did. At Cedar Bluff Ranch, small habits quietly appeared. One cold evening, Savannah found her damp gloves drying beside the stove. She never discovered when Wyatt placed them there. Another morning, Wyatt found fresh coffee waiting before he left for the pasture. No note, no explanation. Just coffee. One windy night, a storm rolled across the canyon. Savannah fell asleep reading near the window. When she woke, a wool blanket rested over her shoulders. Across the room, Wyatt was repairing a saddle strap beneath a lantern. Neither mentioned it. The kindnesses stayed small. That made them harder to ignore. Weeks passed. Then the whispers began. Painted Canyon had always been good at gossip. Outside Miller's general store, men leaned against barrels discussing cattle prices. And people. Especially people. Savannah heard one woman mutter as she passed. "That's the bad luck woman." Another shook her head. "Every town's got one." Savannah kept walking. Her face never changed, but her steps slowed slightly. A few days later, Wyatt entered the feed store and caught two ranch hands talking near the grain sacks. "The cowboy who'll never have a family." The words landed harder than they should have, because they weren't new. Wyatt paid for his supplies and left without responding. That evening, the sun disappeared behind the red cliffs. The ranch house glowed softly beneath lantern light. Savannah sat on the porch mending a shirt. Wyatt repaired a bridle beside her. Crickets filled the darkness. Neither spoke much, yet neither seemed eager to leave. The silence broke when laughter drifted from the road. Two passing cowboys were heading toward town. Their voices carried clearly through the evening air. "You remember Rachel Brooks?" One laughed. "Hard to forget." The second man shook his head. "No woman stays with a barren man." The words struck the porch like a thrown stone. The laughter faded down the road. Savannah's needle stopped moving. Across from her, Wyatt stared into the darkness. His hands remained perfectly still. For the first time since arriving at Cedar Bluff Ranch, Savannah realized there was a story buried beneath the quiet man sitting across from her. And whatever it was, it still hurt. A long moment passed. Neither spoke. The lantern flame flickered between them. Outside, the canyon wind moved through the dry grass. Inside that silence, the shadow of Rachel Brooks had finally entered the story. Neither Savannah nor Wyatt mentioned the conversation from the road. Not that night. Not the next morning. Life at Cedar Bluff Ranch continued as it always had, at least on the surface. September arrived and brought cooler air to Painted Canyon. The cottonwoods near the creek showed the first hints of gold. Cattle prices rose. The general store received its autumn shipment from Prescott. And Harlan Pike came riding through town more often than usual. Everyone knew why. He wanted Cedar Bluff Ranch. The land bordered one of his grazing routes. For years he had made offers. For years Wyatt had refused. One afternoon, Wyatt found Harlan waiting outside the feed store. The older rancher sat comfortably in the shade with one boot resting on the rail fence. "Still holding on to that place?" Harlan asked. Wyatt loaded grain sacks into his wagon. "Still asking?" Harlan smiled. The smile never reached his eyes. Land changes hands eventually. So do conversations. Wyatt climbed into the wagon and drove away. Harlan watched him go. That look lingered longer than it should have. The following Sunday, the town gathered at the small wooden church near the edge of Painted Canyon. Families arrived in wagons. Children chased each other between hitching posts. Women carried pies covered with cloth for the social afterward. Savannah attended with Martha Boone. Wyatt sat 3 pews behind them. The service passed quietly, but trouble rarely announced itself before arriving. Afterward, people gathered beneath the cottonwoods. Coffee was poured from large metal pots. Conversations drifted between weather, cattle, and upcoming harvests. Savannah was speaking with Martha when a woman's voice carried across the yard. Not shouting, just loud enough. A woman who can't bring luck, and a man who can't leave a legacy. Laughter followed. Not from everyone. But enough. The words settled heavily in the afternoon air. Savannah froze. Her coffee cup remained suspended halfway to her lips. Across the yard, Wyatt heard it immediately. He turned. The woman speaking stood near a group gathered beside the church steps. For a second, Wyatt took a step forward. His jaw tightened. His hands closed into fists. Then he stopped. Years of embarrassment held him in place. Years of hearing the same whispers, years of pretending they didn't matter. Only a few seconds passed. But Savannah saw them, saw the hesitation, saw him look away. The moment hurt more than the comment itself. The ride home felt longer than usual. The wagon wheels rolled over dry ruts. Dust followed behind them. Neither spoke. That evening, Savannah sat on the porch watching the last sunlight fade behind the red cliffs. Wyatt eventually stepped outside carrying 2 cups of coffee. He handed her one. She accepted it. "Rachel," Savannah said quietly. The name settled between them. Wyatt stared into the darkness beyond the fence. For a long time, he didn't answer. Then he finally spoke. "She left 8 years ago." Savannah waited. "We were married 7 years." A horse shifted inside the nearby corral. The leather porch swing creaked softly in the wind. "We wanted children." His voice remained steady. Too steady. "We tried." He paused. Nothing happened. Savannah looked down at the coffee cup, warming her hands. "Did a doctor ever tell you it was your fault?" Wyatt shook his head. "No." "Then why do you believe it?" That question seemed to strike harder than any insult. Wyatt looked away, because there wasn't an answer he could easily give. Rachel believed it. His voice dropped. The town believed it. The porch fell quiet. "When enough people say something for enough years," he continued slowly, "eventually you stop arguing." Savannah sat motionless. The lantern beside the door flickered softly. A moth circled the flame. "You should have asked for the truth." Wyatt gave a small laugh. Not because anything was funny, because he didn't know what else to do, maybe. The conversation ended there. Not angrily, not dramatically. Just unfinished. The next morning, Wyatt rose before dawn. The coffee pot was cold. The kitchen was empty. No light burned in Savannah's room. At first he thought she had gone into town early. Then he noticed the open closet, the missing travel bag, the folded blanket on the bed, and a single note resting on the table. Wyatt stared at it for a long moment before unfolding it. The handwriting was neat, simple. A home built on shame can never become a family. Savannah. The ranch suddenly felt larger than it had the day before. Larger and emptier. Outside, the wind pushed against the porch boards. A loose gate knocked softly against its post. For several minutes, Wyatt remained standing alone in the kitchen, the note still in his hand, the coffee untouched, the sunrise spreading across a house that no longer felt warm. And for the first time since Savannah Reed had arrived at Cedar Bluff Ranch, Wyatt Brooks found himself afraid of something worse than the rumors. He was afraid she might never come back. Autumn settled fully over Painted Canyon. The mornings arrived colder. Frost appeared in thin silver lines along fence posts before sunrise. The cottonwoods near the creek had turned gold. Yet Cedar Bluff Ranch felt colorless. Wyatt still rose before dawn, still checked the cattle, still repaired fences, still carried feed to the horses. Nothing in his routine changed. Everything else had. The coffee pot stayed empty until he filled it himself. No lamp glowed in the front room after supper. No quiet voice drifted through the house. Some evenings, he caught himself looking toward the porch when the gate creaked. Each time, it was only the wind. 3 miles away, Savannah had rented a small room behind Dr. Eli Grayson's clinic. The room contained little more than a narrow bed, a wash basin, and a wooden chair near the window. It suited her. At least that was what she told herself. During the day, she helped the doctor. She organized medicines, changed dressings, read instructions written in faded ink on old supply invoices. The work kept her hands busy. It did not quiet her thoughts. One chilly afternoon, Dr. Grayson arrived carrying a wooden box coated in dust. "I haven't opened this thing in years," he said. He set it on a table. Old records, receipts, patient notes, forgotten paperwork. Savannah spent hours sorting through them. Outside, a cold wind rattled the clinic windows. Inside, the smell of paper, lamp oil, and dried herbs filled the room. One stack after another passed through her hands. Then she stopped. A familiar name stared back at her. Rachel Brooks. Savannah frowned. The document was dated almost 9 years earlier. She opened it. Then another. And another. The room seemed to grow very still. A second file rested beneath the first. Then a third, each carrying the same name. Rachel Brooks. Her fingers tightened slightly. Dr. Grayson noticed. "What is it?" Savannah didn't answer immediately. She kept reading. Several pages later, she finally looked up. Did Wyatt ever come back for his test results? The old doctor removed his spectacles. No. He never learned? Dr. Grayson sighed. No. The silence stretched. Outside, wagon wheels rolled past on the street. A dog barked somewhere near the feed store. Life continued. But inside that room, everything had shifted. Savannah looked back at the papers. The records were clear. Painfully clear. Rachel Brooks had visited the clinic multiple times, privately, without Wyatt. The notes described medical concerns that had nothing to do with him, nothing. The doctor lowered himself into a chair. I suspected she'd tell him eventually. Savannah swallowed, but she never did. No. Dr. Grayson stared toward the window. Then she left. Savannah continued reading. What she found next chilled her more than the diagnosis. Several witness statements, property records, old financial agreements, names connected together. Rachel Brooks, Harlan Pike. The pages painted a picture neither Wyatt nor the town had ever seen. Rachel had been involved with Harlan long before she left Cedar Bluff Ranch. Harlan knew the truth. He knew exactly what the clinic records contained. And he had allowed the rumors to spread. Year after year. Offer after offer. Waiting for Wyatt's shame to become weakness. Waiting for Cedar Bluff Ranch to be sold. Savannah slowly lowered the papers. Her heart pounded. Not because of the scandal. Because of Wyatt. For nearly a decade, he had carried a burden that was never his. Every joke, every whisper, every sideways glance, built on a lie. That evening, Savannah walked alone through town. The sun hung low behind the red cliffs. People moved in and out of stores. Children chased each other near the churchyard. A normal evening. Yet she could hardly see any of it. She kept remembering Wyatt standing frozen outside the church. Remembering the way he spoke Rachel's name. Remembering the resignation in his voice when he said that eventually people stop arguing. Not because they believe the lie, because they're tired. At the edge of town, she stopped beside the hitching rail near the general store. Across the street, Harlan Pike stepped out of the saloon. 2 men laughed beside him. Harlan tipped his hat. Confident. Comfortable. Untouched by the damage he had caused. Savannah watched him disappear into the fading light. Then she looked toward the distant hills beyond town. Toward Cedar Bluff Ranch. The truth was finally in her hands. And for the first time since leaving, she knew exactly why Wyatt Brooks had stopped fighting. Because he had never known there was anything left to fight for. The secret hidden inside Dr. Grayson's dusty box had changed everything. And before another week passed, Painted Canyon was going to learn the truth. The town meeting took place on a windy Thursday evening. Most of Painted Canyon gathered inside the church hall beside the chapel. Ranchers filled the back rows. Store owners stood near the walls. Children chased each other outside until their mothers called them in. Harlan Pike arrived early. He wore a dark coat and carried himself with the confidence of a man accustomed to getting his way. Rachel Brooks sat several seats away. She kept her eyes lowered. Wyatt almost didn't come. Martha Boone had to convince him. "You spent too many years carrying this," she told him. "At least hear what's about to be said." So he came. He stood near the rear door, quiet, reserved, prepared for disappointment more than hope. Then Savannah entered. The room gradually fell silent. She carried a worn leather folder beneath one arm. Dr. Grayson followed close behind. The old doctor's expression alone was enough to make people pay attention. Savannah stopped near the front. For a moment, she simply looked around the room. No anger, no performance. Just calm certainty. Dr. Grayson spoke first. His voice carried easily through the hall. He explained the records, the dates, the clinic visits, the facts, nothing more, nothing less. A murmur moved through the crowd. Faces turned. Questions spread from row to row. Then Savannah opened the folder. One page at a time. The truth emerged. Rachel had known. Harlan had known. And Wyatt had never been given the chance to know. The silence that followed felt heavier than any argument. Harlan rose abruptly. "Those records should have stayed private." Dr. Grayson met his gaze. "Private is one thing." His voice hardened. "Using a lie to ruin a man's name is another." No one laughed. No one defended Harlan. For the first time in years, Wyatt saw uncertainty on the rancher's face. Rachel finally stood. Tears glistened in her eyes. She admitted enough. Not every detail. Not every mistake. But enough. Enough for the room to understand. Enough for Wyatt. The meeting ended without shouting, without fists, without revenge. People simply sat with the truth. Sometimes that was harder. Outside, dusk settled across Painted Canyon. Neighbors drifted home beneath a violet sky. Wyatt remained near the church steps. He looked toward Savannah. For several seconds, neither moved. Then she walked over. "I should have come sooner," she said quietly. Wyatt shook his head. "No." His voice was calm. "You came when you knew." The wind lifted a strand of hair across her cheek. He noticed, the same way he'd noticed 100 small things before she left. Neither spoke for a while. The silence felt different now. Not empty. Just honest. A few days later, Wyatt rode to the small house behind the clinic. The afternoon sun hung low above the red cliffs. A child laughed somewhere nearby. When he reached the porch, he saw little Ben Carter asleep in a wooden chair beneath a quilt. The boy's boots barely touched the floor. Savannah sat nearby, repairing a torn sleeve. She looked up when Wyatt approached. For a moment, neither knew what to say. Then Wyatt glanced toward the sleeping child. Ben shifted slightly and settled again. Wyatt smiled faintly. The sight seemed to soften something inside him. "For years," he said quietly, "I thought family meant blood." Savannah listened. The late afternoon light warmed the porch boards. A breeze carried the scent of sagebrush from the hills. Wyatt looked at her. "Maybe family means who stays." The words lingered between them. Simple, honest, hard-earned. Savannah didn't answer right away. Instead, she reached across the space between them and rested her hand on his scarred one. Nothing more. Nothing less. The gesture said enough. Spring arrived slowly. Wildflowers appeared along the creek beds. Fresh calves filled the pastures at Cedar Bluff Ranch. and on a bright April morning, neighbors gathered beneath a cottonwood tree near the ranch house. Martha Boone cried before the ceremony even began. Dr. Grayson pretended not to. Deputy Owen Clark stood proudly among the guests. Several mothers Savannah had helped over the winter arrived with children holding bouquets of desert flowers. The wedding was simple, exactly the way they wanted it. No grand speeches, no extravagance, just promises. Real ones. The kind built for ordinary days. Years later, people still spoke about what happened at Cedar Bluff Ranch. Not because of scandal, not because of rumors, because of what came afterward. Wyatt expanded the ranch. Savannah opened a small care room beside the property, where women and children from miles around could find help. Little Ben spent so much time there that most folks assumed he belonged. Maybe he did. One summer evening, long after the rumors had faded, Wyatt stood beside the fence watching the sun sink behind Painted Canyon. The ranch stretched across the valley before him. Warm light touched the barns, the corrals, the fields. Savannah stepped onto the porch carrying a lantern. Ben ran across the yard chasing a wooden hoop. His laughter drifted through the evening air. Wyatt looked toward the house, toward the people waiting there, toward the life he never thought he could have. And for the first time since asking that painful question in Dr. Grayson's office, he understood something. Hope had never arrived in the answer. Hope had arrived in the form of a woman who stopped beside an old dry well and chose to stay long enough to change everything. The sun disappeared behind the cliffs. The lantern glowed brighter. And at Cedar Bluff Ranch, the people who had once been left behind finally had a place to belong. As the last light slipped behind the red cliffs of Painted Canyon, it became clear that Wyatt's story was never really about a question asked in a doctor's office. It was about what happens when a person carries a wound for so long that it starts to feel like part of who they are. Imagine standing where Wyatt once stood. Imagine spending years believing something was broken inside you. Imagine letting other people's opinions become louder than your own voice. Then imagine meeting one person who sees past all of it. Not because they can fix your life, but because they remind you that your worth was never tied to the thing you feared losing. Maybe that's why this story stays with us. Sometimes healing doesn't arrive with a miracle. Sometimes it arrives quietly. In a shared cup of coffee, a hand that stays, a porch light left on. A person who chooses to remain when walking away would be easier. And maybe family isn't always the one we're born into. Maybe it's the people who sit beside us through the hard seasons and still find reasons to stay when the dust settles. If this story reminded you of someone who stood by you when life felt heavy, tell us about them in the comments. We'd love to hear their story too. And if you enjoy stories about second chances, enduring love, and the kind of hope that grows slowly but lasts, we invite you to join us again. There are many more heartfelt journeys waiting just down the trail, and we'd be honored to share them with you.